First guest for the block of lectures, conversations about the problem of sound and in poetry is Ernesto Estrella, poet, performer, and translator, as I said before. And when inviting him here, direction, if I might say so, that I suggested was very general. So what do you make of this problem, with this problem? How is it in your way? How does it define what you do? Ernesto.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Polina, for inviting me here. It's northernest I've ever been in America. I teach at Yale, so I go to New Haven, but I live in New York, so you know, as New Yorker, you never get out of there. So it's kind of nice. It's almost like coming to Canada here. So yeah, and I really like this disposition of a class. Yeah, it's could be used for many things. Okay, yeah, my name is Ernesto Estrella. I'm from Granada, in the south of Spain. I don't know if you've been there, but you should. And I do poetry. I study poetry. I write poetry, and I do poetry performances from the point of view of sound, which is, you know, there's a whole history of sound poetry. What I do, and then you're going to hear some of that later, the big difference, I think, is that I don't use any kind of samples or my technical devices are minimum. Like, I don't use anything apart from a little bit of reverb, the echo, in the mic, and I only use the voice normally. Now, lately, for one piece, I'm using this thing, which is kind of like a harmonica, which I don't know how to play. And no, I don't, but it doesn't matter. I bought it for breathing purposes, for doing breathing exercises. I'll show you later. And I mean, putting that limitation into my search in sound, I think it's important, because there's a lot of things going on in sound poetry that get a little bit lost or vague, because there's too many things going on nowadays. So you can do anything. You can recite a poem and put a cello below, and then it's going to sound nice, which is like my mother, for example, says about my voice work. It's like, why don't you put a cello? Well, because no, the cello has nothing to do with this. There's a search, and I don't play the cello, which wouldn't be a problem. So I don't think it's so difficult. But like, if there's a search going on in the sound itself, then that's what you have to listen to. And if we're not used to listen to that, it's because we're not used to listen to much. And the purpose of what I'm trying to do here today, it goes in along those directions. So, but I wanted to know, first of all, about, from you that are translating in this translation class, what are the normal adjectives that you use in relation with translation, when you talk about translation? What words come up? From you.
The whole process?
¿Cómo?
The whole process itself?
No, like the regular, like, I would say for me would be like a faithful translation. Those kind of things, just the adjective maybe. Problematic. What else?
The feeling.
Frustration. Okay, like imagine you're writing a review on about a translation that you read. What's like the New York Times? They're always doing that. Right? Like, they put 300,000 adjectives before saying something, which is not really thinking. But what else would you use? Close. Smooth. Okay. How about the tools that you use when you translate? If I say tools, what do you think about?
Transmission.
¿Cómo?
Transmission.
Transmission. Okay.
A dictionary, a person.
A dictionary and what?
A person.
A person. Yeah, sometimes. What do you mean by that?
I find it very helpful to talk to somebody about a word or about
Uh-huh. You see?
Researching the life of the author if you're trying to portray what the author was trying to portray.
Uh-huh. So, like secondary bibliography, right? And biographies. ¿Qué más? What else?
The poem itself.
Mhm. That sometimes is important. Not always, I think. No, there's in the book that you have there, there's you have Levi Leto. Check the. Why don't you read the last kind of lines of the Levi Leto, who's a Finnish experimental poet. The last lines of his article, because then you're gonna see what I mean. But it's not always necessary to have a poem itself. If you give it to me, I can do it, but I want you to read it. Come over, we'll read. Come. I cannot move too much, I have these devices. Okay, let's see. Exactly, no, come, you read it. Come on, what's your name? Jason Ernesto. Очень приятно. Why don't you read this last little paragraph? Okay.
Third, though I don't believe in untranslatability as such, I would not deny the importance of works attempting to create it. A work like Eunoia by Christian Locke, a radical lithogram where in each chapter only one vowel is allowed at a time, is important among other things because of its challenge to translatability. It too would be translated without even glancing at the original. I recently started working on a related project, a book of 300 pages where I'd used the vowels of the first Finnish novel, Sitsiman Biljesta, The Seven Brothers, by Alexis Kivi. All of them in the order they appear in Kivi's work, and no other vowels but them. In a sense, this would be a work for the Finns only. But even this text would not be untranslatable. Being, among other things, itself a translation of the work by Kivi and, well, one where I finally get at least half of the letters right.
You see? Nice. Thanks. And he's at some point there also talks about, you know, John Ashbery, right, the American poet. He says that's interesting. Like there is no, I don't remember how the exact quote, but there is no English translation that Ashbery should be translated to for the American audience into English, which is already in English. So he comes up with these ideas that they sound impossible, but they make a lot of sense in some way. And they're related to some direction that I'm trying to give here. It's two things that I will talk about. One is about listening to sound. So I'm not going to do a history of sound poetry, which I could and would be interesting. But I think before that, it's important to try to give you some real experience here. I mean, if we had a sealed room with speakers and we could make this dim lighted, your experience would be stronger. If you listen to the things I'm gonna play you by yourself, you will get much more. But still, I think we can go there. I can send you the audio files later if they want to try. That's one thing, like listening to the sound as an introduction to anything that has to do with sound. The other one is about the transition from composition to improvisation. Why? Because of what you were saying before, that I think also translation includes people, includes a person or two. One is the thing that you're saying of sharing the doubt or just checking it out. The other one is once you confront the text, there's a two going on already. There's not a one. When you're reading, we tend to think that there's just a one because you can even merge with the text. But there's still always a two. With the translation, it's obvious. And if there's a shared search going on when you translate, even if the poet is completely dead. And I want to approach that from the point of view of what happens between a composed, arrangement of a song, and I'm not going to talk about like classical music, but more like rock, but an arranged version of that and an improvisational approach to it. So you see what does it mean to do a mimesis, like a mimetic translation, which would be the composition. This is the way it should be played. This is the way it should be translated, like an exact, almost exact translation. The other one is really you're opening the search with the text itself. If you have the translator with you, which I recently had that experience with a poem of mine that's been translated into Russian, then it becomes even more intense. And for the one that wrote the poem, too much at some point, because you like every line you've been asked, and it's like at some 7 hours work to translate a poem that if you just gave it to a translator, then you get it and then you correct it or not. But I don't know Russian yet, so that's what happened. So those are the two things. In general, I'm not planning to give you any direct tools in relation with translation. It's more about one, and I believe like what I'm going to be talking about has to do with opening the translation experience in a much more intense and deeper and sensitive experience. The other one is to, I think it's good to have this approach of sound in order to forget about what you're doing at some point and get a little bit of distance and get some fresh air and fresh ideas in order to go back to the translation. Because one of the main points that, and for me it's in the center of what I see in the poem is not the meaning really what matters to me when I'm doing the poem as sound, which is a kind of translation. And in general, I don't think poetry is about meaning. Because about meaning, it's the news. That's it. I mean, that's about meaning. A novel can be about meaning sometimes. Poetry has meaning, but it's not about what does something mean, no? Like, which happens very naturally in the poem because we tend to think like that, because we're very lazy. Instead of that, you confront the poem and you say, okay, what's happening in the poem? What's the poem displaying? What's the poem thinking, even? There's an idea that's been displayed there. That's why I also normally avoid the word concept. I like more the word idea, because an idea can be displayed in the poem. A concept is like we're going to look for it. Like it's kind of mechanic. Same reason why instead of using context, I use frame. Because a context normally predetermines what's going to happen. The word frame, it's a little bit more open. And I'm telling you, I use these things when we're, like I said, I also, apart from doing the sound poetry, I also play in a band, it's kind of free jazz rock band. And we have a lot of problems with this thing between the compositional and the improvisational. So, sound poetry. What do you know or think about that? Forget about sound poetry, sound.
There are some takers.
I just talk.
I actually have a question. You were saying that the meaning of the poetry isn't as important as the other elements, I guess. And I'm just wondering, it kind of struck me as, for example, if you watch a movie and it's a really deep concept and it's a very important concept, we could make that point. Then you could take another movie and it doesn't have a very deep concept, but the combination of the editing and the music and all that together will strike you as so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Are you is that kind of what you're getting at? Like, even though the meaning isn't as important in this piece, it still strikes you at a deeper level because of the music and all that? Is that kind of what you're saying about poetry?
Yes, but also normally what's happened, the problem to approach a poem thinking about meaning and concept is that whatever you find in the poem, you already knew. As opposed to approaching the poem kind of like from a clean slate, in which maybe you find the idea of, like, think about Walt Whitman poem, where the main idea is equality, that we're all equal, no? Okay, good. Like, how does that happen actually in the poem, from the sounds to the sentences to some of the meanings being portrayed there? And normally you find that something happens in the poem that cannot be done otherwise. So there's an it presents or it portrays an idea in a way that you probably hadn't thought about it before. The poem is better than us. That's what I'm saying. In general, literature is better than us in the sense that it's been thought, it's been really, someone has sat down to do that. So if it's a good poem, normally there's going to be something there that we have not done to that extreme. Probably we perceive it, probably we've approached it or it has approached us, but it has not been done in such a radical way. That's what I believe. It doesn't make us worse, it just makes us, we have to really read the poem in order to read the poem.
Just kind of to, sorry to interrupt, but
No,
I'm
interrupt.
absolutely thinking, and again, one of the strangest things, and I think I told many of you about this, that, and I don't know, it was like a couple of years ago at Berkeley when I had a conversation with my teacher and friend, and he was teaching one of the most famous poems by Pasternak. The candle was glowing on the table. And he was kind of teaching it and said, this is one of the most important erotic poems of the century. And I thought that I was losing my mind. I knew it by heart. I knew it by heart for like from the age of 10. I never noticed that it was one of the most erotic poems of the century. I was so what happened? This is precisely an illustration. If we kind of suppress the idea that I'm completely mad, which might be the case, what happens to our reception, to our way to process the text, poetic text, that amazing force of what he does with rhyming, metric scheme, which is one of the most original I can think of. He kind of undoes iambic form in every line by one syllabus. And it is an erotic experience, but of a different kind. And he plays with rhymes and dissonance so subtly that I never cared what it is about. For me, it was a poem about snow, and a text of absolute beauty and pleasure. So this is precisely this point. What happens with information in the text of poetry and how we receive it? Just that's what it is for me.
Yeah, because I think it's not about information.
Right.
It's not informing anything. It's the poem normally, like Alain Badiou, the French philosopher, talks about art like it's doing a hole, a void in knowledge. And I think the poem it's kind of a break in your day, not just because you're inspired and it makes you float and everything, but because it really breaks with the routines in which we normally go from one concept to the other, from one idea to the other. The good thing of doing this from sound is that it's more direct. But my idea is that all these notions that I bring into the sound, they happen if you sit down to just read the poem also. Like it stretches the perception of the poem.
Could we go back to a question and then we interrupted you? So, what is sound?
It can be a really immediate, visceral reaction that creates a kind of mood, but it can be different every time.
How do we relate to sounds in our daily life? That's more my question. How do you, no we, because I know.
Viscerally, emotionally,
Uh-huh.
create anger or create a soothing feeling, anything.
Right.
Well, they can also be used as a means of, threat, knowing when there's a threat approaching to their warning.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like those sounds are just ignored on a day-to-day basis.
Uh-huh.
We don't really hear them.
Or they're just a comfortable background setting for something they're used to.
Yeah, like in the elevator kind of music.
And sometimes it's very hard to escape sound, like especially if it's uncomfortable sound, or like in a film score or something really like. It's one of the senses it's the most difficult to shut out.
Mm-hmm.
It's also the one that provokes some of the most intense feelings. It can, for me, sound is a reminder that I'm alive in a way. You can close your eyes and not, and still listen and still remember that things are happening. That there's this sound that is so incredibly uncomfortable, and that is like a wrench, like driving through my brain. But then there's also the liberating sense of listening to your own voice, remembering, being tied down somehow, but also being released. I don't know. The simultaneous. Once one utters a word, I don't feel as if I really listen to myself when I speak, but when I am conscious of it, it brings me down, reminds me that in speaking, I'm also releasing something that's now been dispersed, and then now everyone in this room now can understand as well.
Nice. Yeah. But you see, some of the things you said have to do with the sound. You connect it to a feeling. You connect it to a meaning again, which is not exactly listening to what you're saying. That a lot of them are ignored. Very often we ignore the ones that don't have a connection to a meaning, or they're not so recognizable. They're not so perceptible also. I mean, that's our kind of nature, because of lack of education in sound. Basically, we're not used to doing these things. Like, for example, and I was in a plane coming from Russia, actually, from Poland, and they put me, in the front part of the plane where they, like, right after first class, they have this place. They put the mothers with the kids there, because there's more space, and they put me there with like 5 Polish mothers and their kids, which you can imagine for like 8 hours or something like that, and the kids. So at the beginning and I was very hungover, of course. I was coming from Russia for like 10 days of some serious drinking. So I sit down and I'm like, Jesus Christ, no. I'm like, I asked the woman, please change me. That couldn't be done. So I'm staying there, and then of course the first half an hour I wanted to kill all the kids and the mothers. But then at some point, I stepped back from my stupidity of saying, yeah, it's a situation, it's a natural situation to want to kill the kids, but it's kind of a poor approach to what's going on. So I just stepped back, really, like my nerves, I took them back, threw them away, and I just started to listen to what's going on. And I had done this before, like I sat down to listen to kids crying and screaming, and I'm amazed by it, but I was put in a position where I could not escape it, so I really started to do it. And I don't know if you've done that sometimes, but it's incredible. You have the kind of monotonous repetition of a kid that can go for 4 hours, and I think you have recent experience of that, but for 4 hours, going on, doing the same sound, and their throat does not break. So they're very powerful. Why do you think they're able to do that? Because their vocal cords are not shaped yet? No. Because they believe every second what they're doing. They believe in it. They don't doubt. Does it have a meaning? Probably not. Do they really want something? Who knows? They just go there and do it. That's one interesting factor. The other one is when the kid is more playful and he starts to look for sounds and starts to do certain things. And he's not even looking for words. He's just amazed with the sound of his own voice, as you were saying, no? With a voice, but it's not the meaning, and it doesn't have such strong theoretical background. It's just, the kids don't have a theoretical background. Some do, and those are the ones that I would really like to kill. But, maybe Marjorie Perlovsky. Anyway. The thing is, when you sit down and see a kid can do that, can sit down and listen to himself and look for hours and sound react. If you start to do things to a kid to start to do sounds to him, they go for it and they're amazed. Then I ask myself, if a kid can do that, so can we. why don't we do that? Why do we have such a poor entry into sound, and we just want the word, or we just want like the song or recitation, no? So I'm telling you this because if you sit down to listen to that, if you sit down to listen, for example, to I live close to a Puerto Rican neighborhood in Williamsburg, New York, and there was this guy preaching about God,